I'm going to introduce here my very good friend, Ashley Hindle, founder and CEO of Fuel. So Ashley, please welcome on stage. Thank you so much for coming.
Thank you for having me.
And Ashley, you have been super into AI and Laravel development, helping a huge number of developers across the world. And I want to give you this opportunity to be on stage and show how awesome you are.
Thank you. I'll do my best, at least. My talk is My AI Writes Perfect, asterisk, PHP. Howdy, everyone. I am Ashley. I used to do really cool AI things at Laravel, like working on Laravel Boost. And now I'm the founder of a startup called Fuel. And I've been writing PHP for over 20 years. I'm an old man. I think 21 years I've been writing PHP. I've spent more than 500 billion tokens on AI things through all the different providers and models. And AI agents today write the vast majority of my code. I'm going to say 99%, but don't tell too many people that because some people get upset. But I've learned a lot doing that, right? And I just want to share what I've learned as I've spent those billions and billions of tokens. And the first thing that I've learned is that AI is capable of writing perfect PHP code reliably. And this wasn't always true. It was debatable for most of last year, actually. Up until November or so, it was arguable whether you could get production-ready code from AI reliably. But 2025 was a threshold year with an inflection point. And the models and the harnesses crossed from mostly works if you watch them constantly to almost all of the time does what you told it to do. And it wasn't a big step change that caused that. It wasn't that they got 10 times more powerful. It's just that they got incrementally better in the exact right way to tip them across an invisible capability line. So quick recap of some things that happened in 2025 over the last 18 months or so. The most pertinent of which, Claude Code was released as a research preview in February, and it was only made generally available in May. So it's barely a year old, yet taken over the entire world. In August, Linear allowed you to assign issues to agents, which is still ludicrous that you can assign issues to agents, but pretty cool. And then the inflection point happened in November when both Opus 4.5 and GPT 5.1 were released. And this is where the models crossed that capability threshold from impressive but needy to genuinely useful. And then everybody goes on a break for their holidays. And in that break, where you see Santa, everybody's experimenting with these new models and harnesses. And thanks to that experimentation and the inflection, there was a hype and tool explosion. OpenClaw's first commit was November, just after those models came out. Gastown was released in December, if you remember that. And Ralph Wiggum loops showed up early January and still won't go away. And people came back to work in January with a tidal wave of new thinking, lots and lots of opinions, and some fancy new workflows. And that inflection point, the new models, the new approaches, all led to AI being more reliable and more consistent. But of course, it didn't make AI coding perfect. Agents are only capable of writing high-quality production-ready code, but they do need to be set up for success. Agents without us, without our assistance, aren't able to create production-ready code reliably. So there's a whole new job to do of getting your systems agent ready so that you can get the most out of them. Because there's a gap between what agents are capable of producing and what you are actually getting. So our job more and more is to close that gap between reality and possibility by making our systems ready for these agents. So to get perfect asterisk PHP code, you have to be agent ready. Your agents need an isolated, safe place, optimized for them to do their work, verify their work, test their work. And optimizing for agents is very different to what we're used to, right? We're used to humans, but agents don't get frustrated by CI checks failing constantly. Agents don't feel infuriated by 18 nitpick review comments like I do. Agents don't mind writing PHP doc blocks on every function, right? So that allows us to have systems and processes that we wouldn't be able to have otherwise. And getting your systems and code bases ready for agents will look very different depending on 20,000 different variables. But generally, from what I've experienced, agent readiness falls into a few pillars, with those pillars supported by a super stable foundation. And this is how I look at it, at least, and how I try to communicate about it. To get great output from agents, you need to start with a reproducible, parallelizable development environment. Super great tongue twister and necessary for agent readiness. Then your agents need automated, fast feedback loops, clear, up-to-date guidance and documentation, and access to useful tools and data. But without that foundation, everything kind of falls over. So the foundation of agent readiness is a bit of a mouthful: reproducible, parallelizable dev environments. Easy. So reproducible just means you have a way to create development environments automatically that are identical and have everything that the system and the agent need to do what they need to do. For many, that's Docker, and for others, it's separate Git clones or Git work trees or copy on write clones, which I use, with a setup script, usually a shell script that does some things, right? And the have everything needed part is kind of critical, right? You need things like your .env file, your config file, composer install, a seeded database with a test user or 3, Elasticsearch, queue listener. You should basically be able to set up a development environment for each piece of work and then use every part of your platform without any extra admin or any extra thought. It should be ridiculously simple and always work. And then you need to be able to run them in parallel, because you'll often be building multiple things at once in this weird AI world, right? And parallelizable is a bit simpler. You need these development environments to be isolated, to use low resources, CPU and RAM mainly, because my laptop isn't that powerful. And they need to be individually addressable so that you can have 5 running and speak to them separately, right? I personally get the individually addressable part by running the HTTP server on different ports for each feature that I'm building. But you can use different URLs if you're fancy and if you're using something like Laravel Herd. So these dev environments, so critical so that your agents don't get tripped up by changes you're making or changes that another agent is making. And it also sets you up well for preview environments per PR, for example, or running agents in the cloud, which is fastly coming upon us. And it also helps onboard new devs, right? If you have these reproducible environments. Super, super valuable. And it helps me get perfect PHP code. Once we have these environments, we start whacking our pillars on top, starting with feedback. And feedback just means giving your agents an incredibly quick and short feedback loop so they know if they're doing the right thing or not. Getting this right is probably the biggest lever to high quality code that you are happy with. So agents start from a completely blank slate, right? They're trained on everything in existence, but not your exact code base and your exact preferences. So this feedback loop enforces our requirements without us needing to teach the agent every one of our preferences and hoping that they internalize it, because they just won't. And there are a few ways to set up this feedback loop, but the best way that I know of right now is to add quality gates and enforce their usage. So quality gates are essentially like CI checks, fancy scripts that check your code and then exit with an error if they don't pass, right? So they gate the code getting into your code base by checking the quality of those changes. I typically, on almost all of my projects, have 3 types of quality gates. My fast quality gate runs the most often on just the changed files, and it's typically enforced with the LSP and a pre-commit hook. And this always has to take less than 10 seconds or you're going to slow everything down. Then I have a feature quality gate that runs as a pre-push hook against the entire code base, and essentially I pre-CI check my work. So when I push it to GitHub, it's all green and everybody thinks I know what I'm doing. And then I have a full quality gate, which does all of that, but runs so many smoke tests and browser tests, headless browser tests, literally everything, so that when I run the full one, I have so much confidence because it's tested, almost everything. And some of that full quality gate is powered by automated browser tests, but much of it is agent coordinated. So if I only ran automated headless browser tests, it will only test what I've preset up, right? And so often this is actually an automated prompt, and the agent decides what to test and how to test. These quality gates, of course, should use the tools that you know and love, things like Rector and PHP stand, Pest, Pint, tons more. And then enforcing these to run is 100% necessary to consistently get high quality code. And Git hooks work perfectly for this if you're using Git. You can put guidance in your agents.md file, claude.md file to say, please run these. But if you do that, you have to assume that your agent won't do that maybe 20% of the time. It will just skip it and pretend it doesn't exist. Very important tip: run programmatic automatic fixes first, then leave anything that Rector can't fix for your agent. So all of those quality gates that I have auto fix and then restage any changes, because agents are slow and really expensive. And so I want things automatically fixed, and then we give whatever's necessary to the agent, right? So encode your rules, your style rules, your quality rules within these tools like Rector, so your agent always produces matching code to the rest of your code base on every commit. When I started with agentic engineering, I tried to encode all of those rules in my agents.md. I would say declare strict types is so necessary, and you must do this and you must do this. And I ended up with a 600-line rules file, and it forgot things. So don't do that. Your agents.md guidelines file should have pointers to things, but the fixing and enforcement should be automatic. Your agents.md guidelines file is critical, right? And it is the first part of the guidance pillar, which is essentially giving your agents the right rules and context, which is super tricky to do and is really, really variable. What the agent needs to do well really changes depending on the feature that you're building, your code base, the harness, even the model, sometimes the day of the week or the hour in the day, depending on some model providers. So, and guidance can be in the moment, like in your chat, or long-lived documentation, things that are there all of the time. And to get perfect PHP code, we need to get all of those right. But to get consistently perfect PHP code, we want to spend most of our time on the long-lived guidance. So our in-the-moment prompts, like our chat messages, don't have to be so exacting. If we don't have a stable foundation in our long-lived context, we easily fall into a trap of every new chat and build message repeating the same information, always saying, don't forget to run the tests. Make sure you use the driver pattern. Make sure to build a service class. You might have been there. I've been there numerous times. So the guidance needed changes depending on agent and model. The latest state-of-the-art models, GPT 5.5, for example, they don't need as much guidance, as much prompting as other models. So you need to match that based on the models and the effort that you're using. If you're using an open weight model like Kimi K2.6 or Minimax M3, you might need to be, or you will need to be, more explicit about what you want to achieve. And one way to get around that is to have what I call golden examples. You can have these files that are the perfect specimen for that type of file or that type of work. So you can have a golden examples directory with test.php, which is the perfect test shape, or you can just flag existing file saying, this is the best code that we have, always build new code exactly like this. A good way of telling your agent about the golden examples is in your core agents.md file. Agents read from agents.md or claude.md if you're using Claude. And so you can say in there, hey, this code is perfect. Reference it every time you need to write a new file. But you do need to keep that file really slim, as it's always provided to the model. So it can eat up tokens really quickly if you're not using a model with really good input caching. My guidelines file for the project that I'm working on at the minute is 124 lines. It starts with a project goal to set the scene. It says, why does this code base even exist? What are we trying to achieve? And then it tells the agent immediately to sacrifice grammar for brevity and tells it no long prose, please. And then we teach the agent in that file about Git safety, and we tell it to write tests for everything based on golden examples. And I also, for almost all of my projects, say smoke test everything. Everything must have a browser test. If it's a CLI command, there must be a smoke test that runs the entire thing, because I don't want to have to manually do those things. I'm a lazy old man. So keep this line short, but you keep this file short, but you can supplement your guidelines file with skills, as we heard before in the Symphony talk. Skills let you package a prompt and associated code, if you like, so that an agent can load that in and then excel at a particular task. And the agent gets a list of those skills, and it can choose to use them when it deems appropriate, or you can specifically say, use this skill. The most popular skill at the minute, if you go based off skills.sh, is the front-end design skill from Anthropic, because agents are notoriously very similar with front-end design. And the first line of that skill actually is commit to a bold aesthetic direction. My favorite skills include front-end design. I always want a nice front-end UX, so I use the front-end design skill and the SVG animation skill because I love animations on my sites. And then I have a browser automation skill because I browse, a test, and screenshot everything. And like Fabian mentioned earlier, a release skill is awesome. So I have a release skill because the release for my projects has maybe 82 steps involved that I don't want to have to manually do and go to GitHub like it's the 90s. I just ask my agent, hey, can you make a release? And it does the tagging, and it does the pushing, and it does the monitoring and all of that. And because it's a skill, it's auto documenting. It exists in the repo. It's a markdown file. So that's there for me whenever I need or when there's a new employee. Documentation is also guidance to your agents, right? So I like to literally clone repositories into a refs folder in my projects and Git ignore it. And then I just say, look at this reference, look at this stuff that I've got for you. Look how helpful I am. I got all of this, all these ingredients for you. You just have to, turn it into a perfect pie. You can also get live documentation, right? From tools like Context 7 or Laravel Boost. I've heard that's pretty great, and you can get up-to-date documentation from there, specific to your code base and your versions and things like that. And when you have a nice base of these long-lived context and documentation and guidance, it's time for just-in-time context, which is your prompt and your approach. I always start, and recommend everybody does, in plan mode, and make sure that plan mode interviews you about what you're trying to achieve, not what you're trying to do, what the end goal is, so that it can discover edge cases and things that I'm not clear about and help me find unknowns. And every one of my messages always tags files. If you're not doing @associated file, you're going to have a worse time than people that are doing that. So I always tag relevant files that I expect to be edited or to copy approaches from. And then I will also say, we recently did similar work. So look at the previous Git commits and, figure out what we did there and, do it in this new place. Guidance, again, is very different depending on your intent and model. If you're using GPT 5.5 extra high, you don't need a lot. But if you're using Mini Max M3, you'll need a lot more. I did have some random tips, and I want to do some live coding, but I can't do live coding right now, so I'll do that at some point on a stream. But random tips that don't fit into the slides. Symlink agents.md to Claude.md. Claude wants to be unique, so it doesn't support the same guidelines file that everybody else does, agents.md. So don't keep them up to date. Don't keep them in sync, and don't use Claude.md as the source of truth. Agents.md is the source of truth, and Claude.md points to it. Start your prompts with what you're trying to achieve, what your intent is, not what to do. Don't say go and edit these things and do these things. Say, I want on this page this thing to happen. And ask your agent to interview you to discover unknowns. Access is the last pillar, and it's a much simpler pillar, but it's growing in importance with how capable agents have got. And this is about ensuring your agent has access to the correct tools and data and the right level of access also, right? Your agent doesn't need right access to the production database. So give it a headless browser that always works. Give it access to the GitHub CLI. My agents are using GH on the command line constantly, like in this example. And give it, if you can, a local agent review system like CodeRabbit or greptile, so it can get an impartial, objective review from a different system. Humans can get access to everything, right? Humans can open 1Password or run forgotten password or ask the CTO, hey, can you get me an invite? But agents can't. So you have to be really proactive and explicit about what agents have access to. And it doesn't much matter what shape it takes, if it's an API or MCP or CLI, just as long as it exists and it always works. Even with these pillars set up, there are times when you won't end up with perfect code, if you can believe that. And here I ask you to take on a weird assumption and a weird new process. When you don't get perfect code, I invite you to assume that the agent is capable of producing perfect code, but wasn't given the right environment, feedback, guidance, or access to do it. Annoyingly, assume it's your fault you didn't get what you wanted. Take 100% responsibility. Just like we do with a new developer or a no-blame culture, right? We don't say, oh, Nuno deleted the production database, he's the worst. We say, why did our systems allow that? Which guidelines weren't clear enough or weren't followed? Why did we give him so much access? And we need to ask those two of our agents. Of course, sometimes it is absolutely 100% the agent's fault and it was just dumb. But let's start from the other end of the assumption. Then take on a weird new process called close the gap. This is a philosophy for life too, actually, that my wife and I practice and that we aspire to, but works perfectly for agents also. This close the gap process is about taking 100% responsibility, then making small changes to close the gap between where you are or where your agents are and what's possible and what they are capable of producing. So you investigate like a scientist where the agent went wrong or made a bad assumption or didn't have the access or had too much access. Then you modify a pillar to account for it, to behave more appropriately, to close the gap between reality and where you are and possibility. Quick recap, bad joke. This is how I work. These are the systems and processes that I use each day. Agents do all of my development and QA and reviews. I'm usually building around 8 things at once across 3 or 4 projects at once. I'll use an isolated development environment for each semi-large build, and I keep the main checkout for me to work on with small tasks. And for every build, I'll use the custom plan mode with GPT 5.5 extra high. That interviews me, creates a markdown plan, that gets converted to a graph of tasks, and they get ran by different models. I'm experimenting right now with optimizing for cost and using open weight models. So I'm using things like Kimi K 2.6, Minimax M3, GLM 5.1, things like that. Then go back to GPT 5.5 extra high to do a review and automated QA. It is currently the case that I use Opus for UI because its vision support is still so much stronger than every other model, except maybe some Gemini models. But I expect that to change in the next couple of weeks with GPT 5.6. I do check in on my agents from my phone from time to time, especially when I go on a walk and I have a new idea for something. I'll voice transcribe into an agent too. That's roughly how I get perfect PHP code from agents. This is what works for me today. It'll change tomorrow because of something, right? And there are lots of GitHub repos and pieces of software to help with these pillars and approaches. So you can use the Superpowers skill or Vercel's agent browser or JetBrains Air development environment or Polyscope or Soloterm or Fuel like I do. The tool doesn't matter as much as the approach and the understanding though. So you can have a lot of impact with agentic engineering like this. That's me. I've been Ashley Hindle. Keep being awesome. I'll see you out there.
That was such a great talk. Everyone clap, please, on the chat. We want to see those clap emojis on the chat. Such a masterclass about AI development in 2026. And thank you so much for that. I really appreciate it. Loved your talk. I love the way you mentioned quality insurance through tooling like PHP Stand, Reactor, Laravel, Pint, Past, PHP Unit, PHP CS Fixer. We have a lot of quality tooling in the PHP ecosystem.
So
I appreciate you mentioned all of that. I have a question for you. You briefly mentioned at the end of the talk, so I want to kind of expand a little bit on that, about your favorite stack in 2026. You mentioned open code, ChatGPT, also. I wonder if you can expand a little bit on this.
Yeah. Well, I started my own startup to build an agentic development environment. So I'm using that for the core flow. But then the models and harnesses that I'm using Codex, GPT 5.5 extra high, for almost everything. And I do use GPT 5.5. I found if you change the effort to medium or high, you get great results for much faster and much cheaper. And then Open Code Go, you pay $10 a month and you get a certain amount of access to open weight models like K 2.6 and Quen. And that's incredible. Like if people don't have an Open Code Go subscription, that's really great. So I also like to use that to get access to Quen 3.6, for example.
Open code through the terminal or through a desktop app?
Through Fuel. Yeah. I've not opened an actual agent itself in a long, long time.
Okay.
Wow. Yeah. Super interesting. There was so much to unpack from this talk.
100%.
I'm going to have to rewatch it.
100%.
We've talked before, and I asked you some skeptical questions about AI before.
Yeah,
and so
I like them.
Yeah, it's really interesting. I had one question I wanted to highlight from Larry, actually, who's here as well. Yeah, he's laughing. Yeah, you're allowed to do that, Larry. It's coming later today.
Yeah.
Larry asked, how capable are the local run models at this point? Not.
Simple. Unless you have 8 DGX Sparks, which cost, I don't know, 80,000 euros maybe, or 20 GTX 4090s or something, you're not getting good results. You can do certain things with them, right? But don't expect to get production ready code. They will need a lot more hand-holding. That won't be the case for long, though. That's the case right now.
So you don't foresee local models being actually usable for PHP development?
Not anytime soon.
Interesting.
Your Apple MacBooks actually come with a foundation model built in that you can use a Python script called appfel to call the model within your machine. So I do use that in Fuel to generate the titles for threads, for example. If somebody says, I want to do this, that can generate a title, and that's a local model. And it's like 3 billion parameters. It's tiny. But that's what people use in local models for, right? They're using it for voice transcription and generating titles and things like that, not huge swathes of code.
It's really thought-provoking. The talks will be published on this channel as well after the fact. Give me a week or so the time to cut everything up, but you'll be able to rewatch it as well, which I think is a good idea. Super.
I won't rewatch it.
Yeah.